Federal prosecutor Marvin Rudnick is a stocky bulldog of a man with thick glasses and unruly hair. His brown suit looks like he slept in it. The man sitting across from him, Joe Isgro, couldn't be more different. Slicked back hair, a black silk suit, and a single gold crucifix earring. To Rudnick, Isgro looks exactly like what he's accused of being, a shady, mob-connected music industry hustler who's up to his neck in Payola. Like millions of other Americans, Rudnick watched the blockbuster NBC News report on Payola that aired about 2 months ago. Isgro was the star of that show. The TV crew filmed him in a New York hotel lobby, meeting with Mafia Don John Gotti and his underboss, a convicted heroin trafficker named Joe Armone. Isgro was seen heading up to the hotel penthouse carrying what appeared to be an envelope full of cash. Rudnick, who convened a grand jury to investigate Payola, thinks it was a payment for the mob's help in delivering bribes to DJs on the take. But Isgro maintains he's innocent, and furthermore, he says NBC's report has destroyed his business. Rudnick can't believe it, but Isgro came down here willingly to meet with him, and it seems like he's mostly here to complain. It's April 11th, 1986, and at the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, Isgro and his lawyer sit opposite Rudnick and an assistant prosecutor at a dark wood conference table and size each other up. Isgro leans across the table and gestures wildly as he speaks. I had to lay off 20 people last week. Good people. They didn't do anything wrong. I run a legitimate business. So you say, but now I find out you're investigating me. So I told my lawyer, let's go down there and meet with them. Set the record straight. That's great, Mr. Isgro. Maybe you can start by explaining why you were meeting with John Gotti and Joe Armone. I've known Joe for 13 years. He's like family to me. I have a linguine dinner with him and his wife every time I go to New York. You're telling me I can't visit with my friends? And John Gotti? Why were you meeting with him? It wasn't a meeting. He was just there, and I recognized him and said hello. Come on, wouldn't you want to meet John Gotti, the most famous mobster in New York? No, I wouldn't actually. Okay, well maybe not you, but plenty of people would. I love The Godfather. I just wanted to shake his hand. If you saw me shaking hands with Tom Cruise, would that make me a movie star? Come on. For the next 2 hours, Isgro patiently answers all of Rudnick's questions. He's articulate, respectful, even likable. But Rudnick spent his whole career interviewing white-collar criminals, and Isgro's explanations don't add up. Why, for example, are labels willing to pay Isgro such high fees to promote their records? So, explain to me how it costs $300,000 to get a Michael Jackson single on the radio. He's already a big star, isn't he? Sure he is. When a lot of big stars release singles, they can't all be hits. Only the ones that cost $300,000? It's not that simple. Look, what the labels are paying for are my relationships. The program directors at these top 40 stations, they know me and trust me. I have access. If I bring them a song and say, this is going to be a hit, they pay attention. And that's worth something. Isgro calls it a business, but to Rudnick it looks like extortion. When the interview ends and Isgro and his attorney leave, he turns to the assistant prosecutor. We got this guy's tax returns yet? They were subpoenaed last week. Haven't come through though yet. Follow up. And get me a list of who's still working for him. I want their returns too. Rudnick is sure Isgro is up to something illegal, and he's sure that with enough digging, he'll be able to find it. But he also suspects that Isgro is just the tip of the iceberg. Not only are there his fellow promoters, a group called the Network that allegedly controls access to every top 40 station in the country, there's also the record labels themselves. Since NBC News broke its Payola story, they've all severed ties with Isgro and the rest of the network. They insist they didn't know about any illegal activity, but Rudnick finds that hard to swallow. American Scandal is sponsored by the new Audible original Bad Republican by Meghan McCain. In her debut audio memoir, Meghan McCain gives a first-hand look into the life of the conservative rebel and departing co-host of The View. You'll hear what it's like to grow up as the daughter of an American icon and to mourn his loss very publicly just 1 year into her tenure as co-host of America's most-watched daytime talk show. Her memoir also reveals how she handled attacks from the U.S. president and her thoughts on cancel culture, dating, and how our country treats new mothers. It's unsparingly honest, deeply relatable, and highly entertaining. Go beyond what you know about Meghan McCain from TV and your newsfeed. Visit audible.com/Bad Republican and listen now.
We get support from the new podcast, Hemingway's Picasso. Stephen Coe lived many lives. He was an NFL journeyman, a male model, and one of the most well-connected smugglers in 1980s Miami. Coe collected many souvenirs from his adventures, but his most treasured bounty, a beautiful ceramic crafted by Pablo Picasso and gifted to Ernest Hemingway at the author's Cuban home. So the story goes. Lost during the Cuban Revolution, the artwork resurfaced when Coe took it as payment for a drug run financed by the notorious Pablo Escobar. Coe passed away in 2018, passing the piece down to his son, Stevie. Stevie feels he needs to complete his father's mission of selling this piece and telling Steve's cinematic life story. Is the Picasso authentic or a fraud? Was Steve Coe a big talker or a real deal smuggler? Listen to new episodes of Hemingway's Picasso every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
From Wondery, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Scandal. For as long as DJs have played records on the radio, there has been payola. In 1960, Congress outlawed the practice, but in the 80s, it made a comeback, this time with assistance from the mob. At first, the record labels themselves tried to end payola, A group of independent record promoters called the Network had grown so powerful that they alone controlled access to nearly every top 40 radio station in America. Their exorbitant fees were bleeding the labels dry, but every effort to stop them failed. Now it's the government's turn. Their investigations have already uncovered evidence of Mafia involvement in the record industry on both coasts. If they connect the dots between the mob, the Network, and Payola, they might be able to expose the biggest criminal conspiracy in the history of the music industry and finally bring it down. This is episode 5, Music and the Mob. It's April 29th, 1986, 3 weeks after Marvin Rudnick's interview with Joe Isgro. Today he's working on a different but related case, and it's led him to a rundown Holiday Inn on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. Rudnick follows an FBI agent down a long carpeted hallway to a room at the end. They're both dressed casually in jeans and polo shirts. They're about to interview a man in the witness protection program, so they need to keep a low profile. Inside the dimly lit hotel room, the agent introduces Rudnick to his witness, a record wholesaler from Darby, Pennsylvania named John Lamont. He's younger than Rudnick was expecting, with a boyish mop of messy brown hair, but his left eye droops, and there's a web of scars across his temple and cheekbone. A year ago, a mobster named Corky the Galoot Vistola put Lamont in the hospital with a single punch. Lamont's skull fractured in so many places that it's now held together with wire. Lamont's in witness protection because the feds need him to talk about that punch. Vistola's attack was the bad end to a deal gone sour. In 1984, Vistola acted as middleman between Lamont and MCA Records for the sale of 4 million discounted records, called cutouts. Lamont was supposed to pay over $1 million for the shipment, but there was a problem. When Lamont received it, all the best cutouts were missing. The only titles left were discount bin junk. He would never have been able to earn enough from selling them to repay Vistola. But Lamont's a funny, likable guy, and for a while he was able to charm the mobsters, even get them on his side. But eventually, Vistola lost his temper. When the deal first came to Rudnick's attention, he was only investigating the MCA record side of it. More specifically, he was investigating Vistola's connection at MCA, a guy named Sal Pincello, also known as Sal the Swindler. He's a veteran but low-ranking mobster, and Rudnick doesn't really understand how he ended up working for MCA, or overseeing the disposal of over $1 million worth of cutouts. Rudnick is hoping Lamont can enlighten him. Unfortunately, most of what Lamont knows is secondhand. But he does mention that Pincello got the gig at MCA through Morris Levy, another of Vistola's cutout partners, and the same man Lamont thinks stole those missing 400,000 records. That name gets Rudnick's attention. Levy is a music industry veteran, owner of a label called Roulette Records. He also has deep, long-standing connections to high-ranking members of the Mafia. Pincello is Levy's inside guy, Lamont explains. The whole thing was a setup. They were never planning on sending me the full shipment. They thought because Vistola was involved, I'd just eat my losses and pay up, and believe me, I would have if I could have afforded it. Rudnick presses Lamont for more details about the MCA side of the deal. Lamont says that to close the deal, he flew to Los Angeles to meet with Pincello in person. They went to a fancy restaurant in West Hollywood, where Pincello walked in with a group of MCA senior executives. For Rudnick, this is a crucial detail. Up until now, MCA's attorneys have insisted that Sal Pincello was an independent contractor, barely connected to the label. But now Lamont is putting him in the same room with MCA's top brass. If that's true, it's likely that others at MCA knew what Pincello was up to, which would potentially link one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world directly to the mob. After 3 hours, Rudnick finally thanks Lamont for his time and shakes his hand. "Can I call on you to testify?" he asks. Lamont looks at the FBI agents guarding him. "If they think it's safe, sure." Rudnick flies back to LA with plenty of unanswered questions. It's still not clear why Morris Levy was involved, or why he'd risk pissing off his mob associates just to swindle some poor record wholesaler from Pennsylvania. And Rudnick's still not sure why MCA would put a career criminal in charge of over $1 million worth of records, even if Levy did vouch for him. But it's obvious that MCA's lawyers know more than they're letting on. And if they're hiding something about Sal Pincello, there's a good chance they're hiding something about Rudnick's other case, the one involving Joe Isgro and the Network. On a smoggy summer morning in July of 1986, a small group of reporters gathers in the plaza outside the entrance to the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. They're here for the first day of the Payola grand jury hearings, hoping to catch witnesses as they pass through the courthouse's imposing bronze doors. Most of the reporters are from local newspapers or music trade magazines, lone men and women in rumpled business attire, clutching notepads and portable tape recorders. The grand jury hearings are closed, so most major news outlets aren't here. They don't think there'll be much to report on. The lone exception is the team from NBC News. Reporter Brian Ross broke the Payola story, and he's definitely not going to miss this. With his tailored blue suit and 3-person crew, he stands out amidst the other reporters, and that's a problem. Because unfortunately, by now, everyone in the music industry recognizes Ross on sight and runs the other way. After all, Ross's first Payola story got his main source, a Miami DJ named Don Cox, jumped and beaten by men with baseball bats. Others have been understandably reluctant to let an NBC camera anywhere near them. But Ross is nothing if not persistent. So when he sees the day's first witness trying to sneak past the cluster of reporters, he chases him across the plaza, cameras in tow. The man, a top 40 radio program director, winces as Ross thrusts a microphone in his face, peppering him with questions. What are you going to tell the grand jury today? Did you take Payola? Do you know Joe Isgro? The program director thinks for a moment, then looks Ross in the eye and says, Buddy, you could use a good dandruff shampoo. As the morning drags on and more witnesses hurry past the reporters without commenting, Ross gets frustrated. No one wants to speak to him. His Payola story has gone cold. So that day, he packs up and heads home early. But just a few months later, Ross gets a tip from one of his sources at the FBI. There's going to be an arrest, a big one. The source gives him a date and the name of a hotel in Boston. Ross tells them the cameras will be there. At the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Boston on September 24th, 1986, Roulette Records owner Morris Levy wakes up to the sound of pounding on the door of his suite. Bleary-eyed, he looks at the clock on the nightstand, 6:30 a.m.
Mr. Levy, open up, please.
Levy throws on a hotel bathrobe and pads to the door. He's 59 and still an imposing, heavy-set man. It takes some effort for him to move his large frame, though, especially at this hour.
Who is it? FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open up, or we'll break it down.
Levy opens the door with a sigh, and 3 agents barge in, guns drawn. Morris Levy, you're under arrest. Fine. You got me. Can I put some clothes on? The agents let Levy get dressed, then handcuff him and march him down the hall to the elevator. No one speaks. Levy doesn't need to ask them why they're here. He already knows. A few months after Corky the Galoot Vistola broke John Lamont's face, the FBI showed up at Roulette Records headquarters in Midtown Manhattan to serve Levy with a subpoena for his financial records. Somehow, they knew Levy was part of the MCA Records cutout deal. Levy figures it had to be that bastard Lamont ratting him out. Levy knew it was only a matter of time before the FBI came back to arrest him. He'd hoped they would give him a chance to turn himself in, but they probably hoped this show of force will scare him, maybe convince him he should cooperate, turn against his friends. But he's not that easily intimidated. In the lobby, though, he realizes there's another reason for all the drama. A camera crew from NBC News is filming the whole thing. Someone at the FBI must have tipped them off, told them they could get a great image for their next report on scandal in the music industry, an old man in handcuffs. Levy lets the FBI agents whisk him past the cameras and into a waiting, unmarked car. Someone pushes down on the back of his head as he's shoved into the back seat. And later that morning, in a federal court in Boston, Levy is arraigned on 3 charges of extortion and racketeering in connection with the MCA cutout sale. If convicted on all counts, he could face up to 60 years in prison. Levy thinks that number is also meant to scare him. Still, the thought that he could do any jail time at all because of a punk like John Lamont infuriates him. Levy posts the $500,000 bail and calls his lawyer to discuss the case. His biggest problem is the galoot. The FBI tried to arrest Vistola too, but they didn't get him. And if Vistola thinks Levy is doing anything to cooperate with the feds, well, jail will be the least of Levy's problems. Might even be better. Levy needs to assure Vistola and other members of his gang that he's keeping his mouth shut, but he's no way of reaching them. Unless he goes big. After hanging up with his lawyer, Levy calls NBC News and asks to speak to Brian Ross, the most notorious man in the music business, a man implicated in the big Payola scandal of the 50s, long alleged to be the main link between music and the mob, is about to go public. It's a huge risk, but Levy's got no choice. If he says nothing, he could wind up dead. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Glinowitz was a hometown hero and 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. These were secrets that, once uncovered, would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 3rd season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app. Brian Ross can't believe his luck. Morris Levy has agreed to a live, on-camera interview less than 24 hours after his arrest and in the most public forum imaginable, The Today Show. For Ross, the timing couldn't be better. He needs a fresh angle on his ongoing investigation of the Mafia's involvement in the music industry. There's still not much happening on the Payola front. Marvin Rudnick's grand jury in Los Angeles has yet to hand down any indictments. But this other scandal, involving Levy and MCA Records, has all the trappings of another sensational story. Ross interviews Levy via satellite feed. Ross is at the Today Show studios in New York. Levy appears at an NBC affiliate studio in Boston. As soon as the cameras start rolling, Ross cuts straight to the chase.
Mr. Levy, federal authorities were describing you yesterday as the godfather of the American music business, the connection between the mob and the music business. What do you say to that?
There is no connection between the mob and the music business.
Levy also denies that MCA Records had any direct involvement in the sale of their own cutout records.
Mr. Levy, let me ask you this. The indictment says essentially that you were involved in trying to collect about $1 million for MCA Records, that you and a New Jersey Mafia figure by the name of Corky Vistola were doing that together and had someone beat up.
That's distorted and not true.
Was someone beat up, do you know?
I heard he was, but I haven't seen it.
Were you responsible in any way for that?
No, sir.
Why were you collecting the money on behalf of MCA? What was your
I wasn't
deal?
collected. That's not true either. The party that supposedly owed me $1 million, owed the company $1 million. We sold him the records, and he owed us $1 million, and he wasn't paying. And I honestly believe that he wasn't paying because the witness protection program told him not to pay, so that possibly somebody could say something wrong to him or threaten him on the phone, and they could entrap somebody. That's what I honestly believe.
Throughout the interview, Levy kept bringing up the witness protection program, calling it unfair, unconstitutional, saying that it's used to entrap people. He even claims he's being charged as punishment for refusing to enter witness protection. Ross realizes why he keeps harping on it. Now that he's been arrested, Levy is afraid his mob associates will think he's going to flip and go underground. So he's swearing his allegiance to Omerta, the Mafia code of silence.
The charges are ludicrous. If I joined the witness protection program, there would have been no charges.
Mr. Levy, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I take it you're going to enter a plea of not guilty to all this?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Ross.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ross pulls out his earpiece and lets out a heavy sigh. The interview was tense, as he knew it would be, but he got what he wanted. As far as Ross is concerned, Levy's repeated mentions of the witness protection program are as good as a confession. Levy was basically declaring over and over on national television that he's not a snitch. It's classic mobster behavior, and Ross has seen it all before. With Levy now awaiting a trial date, Ross can turn his attention back to the Payola case against independent promoter Joe Isgro, because back in Los Angeles, prosecutor Marvin Rudnick's grand jury is still calling witnesses, including many of Isgro's current and former employees. On another smoggy LA morning in April 1987, bodyguard David Michael Smith sits alone in a brown vinyl booth at a Denny's in Los Angeles' San Fernando Valley, wolfing down his Grand Slam breakfast. In half an hour, he's got to be at Isgro Enterprises' new offices in nearby Universal City. Smith no longer works for Isgro full-time. He's just called in for the occasional odd delivery job or to accompany his boss to a record label meeting. But lately, those meetings are happening less and less often. He's just finishing the last of his coffee when a short man in a cheap suit approaches his booth. "Excuse me, are you David Michael Smith?" "Who's asking?" The man pulls out a manila envelope. "I'm with Immigration and Naturalization Services. You're being subpoenaed." "Immigration? What's this about?" "It's all in the subpoena. Have a nice day, Mr. Smith." The immigration agent can't leave fast enough. Smith stares after him furiously, choking back rage. And he rips open the envelope and reads, "You are hereby commanded to appear." Sure enough, Smith is being called to testify before the grand jury investigating Isgro Enterprises' alleged mafia ties and payola activities. Apparently, the only way they could compel Smith's testimony was to report him to the INS as an undesirable alien. Smith chokes back a laugh at that phrase, but he knows this is serious. By now, he's delivered hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cash and drugs for Isgro Enterprises. He's seen Isgro meeting with his mob friend Joe Armone, one of the men seen with mafia boss John Gotti on that NBC report. He still doesn't know everything about what Isgro is up to, but he knows enough. He'll either have to lie to the grand jury or tell the truth and incriminate himself and his boss. And if he chooses to tell the truth, well, things don't always end well for people who cross Joe Isgro. There is another way, of course, for Smith. Instead of heading into the office, he rushes back to his apartment and starts packing. He's going back to London on the next flight he can book. 4 months later, in August of 1987, the man who ordered Smith's subpoena, federal prosecutor Marvin Rudnick, gets some bad news. His boss's boss wants to meet with him, a guy named Iron Mike DeFeo, the deputy chief of the Justice Department's Organized Crime Division. When Iron Mike calls a meeting, it's never for anything good. He's the Justice Department's enforcer, an ex-military officer with a buzz cut and a bad temper. Rudnick is not looking forward to hearing what's on his mind, because Rudnick thinks he knows why the meeting is being called. He's still juggling 2 investigations, one into MCA Records' role in Morris Levy's cutout scheme, and one into Payola, where his primary target is Joe Isgro. The MCA case is going well. The Payola investigation has been harder. He keeps butting heads with the IRS agents who are supposed to be helping him. Half the time, he can't even get them to file the subpoenas he requests. He only went to Immigration Services to approach Isgro's bodyguard, David Michael Smith, because the IRS refused. In the conference room, Iron Mike DeFeo is waiting. Just as Rudnick expected, the IRS has filed a complaint about him. "They say you're unable to get along with your agents," DeFeo says, "so we're taking you off the Payola case. MCA only from now on." Rudnick is stunned. He expected to be reprimanded, not taken off his biggest case entirely. "But we're making progress," he protests. "I'm close to getting an indictment on Isgro." But DeFeo's decision is final. Another prosecutor will complete the Payola grand jury hearings and handle any subsequent indictments. Rudnick's Payola work is done. Rudnick heads back to his office, seething. He knows the thoroughness with which he pursues his cases can sometimes rub people the wrong way, but he's never been pulled off an important case like this. He suspects it can't just be because of some low-level IRS agent complained about him. Someone higher up the chain of command must not have liked the way he was handling his investigation. But who? Rudnick has a theory, but he can't prove it. Several of the major record labels that have been caught up in his Payola case are run by powerful people with strong connections in Washington. They'd hoped he'd keep his investigation focused on the indie promoters, and they're not happy with the wider net. MCA's chairman, for example, is a former talent agent whose client list once included an actor named Ronald Reagan. And lawyers for CBS Records recently threatened to go over Rudnick's head and complain about his aggressive pursuit of the label's financial records to senior members of the Justice Department. That was after Rudnick found evidence that a CBS Records executive may have been taking kickbacks from the label's payments to Joe Isgro. Rudnick dismissed the lawyer's threat at the time, but now he wonders if they made good on it. Rudnick's only way to test his theory is to go after MCA Records as aggressively as he can on his remaining case, the one involving Morris Levy, the New Jersey Mafia, and the sale of 4 million cutout records. Officially, his primary target is low-ranking mobster Sal Picello, and MCA's lawyers have bent over backwards to distance the label from Payola, saying that he acted alone, and that if MCA didn't properly vet his background, that was just because someone cut corners, nothing more nefarious than bureaucratic oversight. But Rudnick never really bought that story. And now that MCA and Payola are his only case, he's more determined than ever to prove that MCA knowingly hired a mobster to orchestrate a shady deal on their behalf. Rudnick fires off a fresh round of subpoenas, requesting financial records and interviews with MCA's top executives. Within weeks, he gets a response, but not the kind he was expecting. A lawyer for MCA calls him and says, "We want you to know that we are not happy with the way you're handling the Payola case, and we have friends in the courthouse. We can make life very difficult for you." Rudnick doesn't report the call. But if the threat was meant to deter him, it has the opposite effect. He's going to go after MCA harder than ever now, because whatever it is they're trying to hide, he's getting close.
Ross Ulbricht is using the library's Wi-Fi to work on his online marketplace, Silk Road. The site specializes in selling contraband like illegal drugs and depends on cryptocurrency to keep users anonymous. Suddenly, he hears a commotion.
I hate you! Get away from me!
But as he turns his head, a woman grabs his laptop.
Freeze! FBI!
The officers slam Ulbricht's body against the table. Then, the sound of handcuffs being clicked shut signals the end of his life as a free man. Hi, I'm David Brown, the host of Wondery's show Business Wars. We go deep into some of the biggest corporate rivalries of all time. And in our latest series, we tell the story of the wild frontiers of the digital gold rush. Listen to Crypto Wars on Business Wars on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Wondery app. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen 1 week early and ad-free.
It's 1:30 in the afternoon on February 25th, 1988. In San Mateo, California, a bedroom community just outside San Francisco, Ralph Tashjian steps out of his home office to answer the door. His wife is in the kitchen, and their 3-year-old son is upstairs somewhere playing with his nanny. Their other son, who's in 2nd grade, is at school. Tashjian is an independent record promoter, nicknamed Tash the Flash for his colorful clothes and loud personality. He is of Armenian and Italian descent, with a mane of wavy dark hair and a handlebar mustache. He and his family have lived in this leafy suburb since 1985, when they moved here to be closer to Tash's parents in San Francisco. Before that, they lived in Los Angeles, which is where Tash worked for another independent promoter, Joe Isgro. Tash knows all about Isgro's legal troubles. He's already been called once to testify before the Payola grand jury down in LA, and was warned that he might be called to testify again. He also knows that Isgro's legal troubles could easily become his own. He did more than his fair share of Isgro's dirty work over the years, delivering Payola in the form of cash and cocaine to dozens of radio stations. Still, he's not prepared for what happens when he opens the front door and finds 2 men and 2 women in business suits standing on his front porch. Yes, hello, can I help you? Ralph Tashjian, IRS. We have a warrant for your arrest. Before Tash can respond, the agents are across the foyer and into his house. 2 grab his arms while a 3rd pulls out a set of handcuffs. Come on, guys. Was really necessary? Standard procedure. Tash's wife Valerie comes in from the kitchen and drops a dish towel in shock. Val, go upstairs and tell the nanny to stay with Michael in his room. He doesn't need to see this. But as Valerie heads for the stairs, one of the female IRS agents blocks her path. Sorry, Mrs. Tashjian. You're under arrest too. What? What did she do? You'll both be read the charges at your arraignment. 2 agents accompany Valerie upstairs, where she explains the situation to the startled nanny. Then they tell her to change out of her dress into something more practical. Jeans or slacks, and no jewelry. You'll be spending some time in jail. Valerie changes, choking back tears. Then the agents put her in handcuffs and march her and her husband outside. An NBC News van is parked across the street, filming the whole thing. Tash turns to his wife, about to offer some words of reassurance, but before he can speak, 2 IRS agents put her in the backseat of a gray sedan. As it pulls away, they lead Tash to a separate car. He realizes that they're splitting them up, hoping she'll rat him out or give him information that's inconsistent with what he says. He knows it won't work. Valerie has no information to give. She manages their personal finances, but has nothing to do with Tash's business dealings. She's barely aware of Joe Isgro. Tash kept it that way, for her own safety. Later, at a federal courthouse, the Tashjians find out why they've been arrested. Ralph Tashjian is being indicted on multiple counts of tax evasion and conspiracy to distribute cocaine to radio DJs and program directors, as well as giving false testimony under oath to the grand jury. Valerie is charged with preparing false tax returns on her husband's behalf. Joe Isgro is hit hard by word of the arrests. He always liked Tash the Flash. His jovial style made him a very effective spokesman for Isgro Enterprises, and he trusted him. For all his flashiness, he also knew how to be discreet. But now that both Tash and his wife are in custody, Isgro doesn't expect that discretion to last. He knows they arrested Tash to get to him, and that Tash will tell the feds whatever they want to hear about Isgro Enterprises to save himself and his wife from serious jail time. By now, Joe Isgro is a shadow of his former self. His jet black hair is now streaked with gray. The cream-colored Rolls-Royce he once drove to meetings is gone, along with the fancy mansion he owned in the hills above the San Fernando Valley. Now he lives in a modest bungalow in Glendale. Joe Isgro Enterprises has downsized too, into a smaller, cheaper office far from Hollywood. He still gets some business, but not from the major labels. They've cut him off entirely. A few independent labels and artist managers are the only clients he has left, and they pay 1/10 the fees he used to command, sometimes less. As far as Isgro is concerned, he's a victim, the target of a vicious smear campaign in the press, all started by the many enemies he made at the major labels over the years. He knows it's the label heads who tipped off NBC News and the rest of the media to the existence of the network and identified him as the leader. They blamed him for how fast the cost of independent promotion went up. They made sure he became the scapegoat as the media and the feds began looking into Payola, as if Joe Isgro is the only man alive who ever bribed a DJ. But whatever Joe Isgro may or may not have done, he's right about one thing. Most of his fellow network promoters have already escaped the Payola scandal unscathed. A few had to lay low for a year or two, but most are already back in business. They're even back to their old ways, paying off DJs with cash and drugs. As for the major labels, they're still paying out huge sums to independent promoters, but now they're funneling the money through artists and their managers. What used to show up in the marketing budget under radio promotion now shows up in the artist budget, hidden under things like album advances or tour support. Isgro knows he probably can't save his business, but he's hopeful that he can cash out through another means, an antitrust lawsuit against the major labels, accusing them of illegally colluding to eliminate independent radio promotion. He filed the suit back in '86, shortly after that NBC News report made him out to be some sort of mobbed-up supervillain. Since then, the case has been inching along through the courts. Many labels have quietly settled for small amounts, enough to help Isgro keep his head above water. By mid-1988, only 2 labels remain, Warner Brothers and MCA, and the case is finally set to go to trial. This is one day in court Isgro is looking forward to. If he wins, the labels will owe him as much as $25 million for lost business and damages. What a pre-trial hearing on August 22, 1988, dashes Isgro's hopes. The judge abruptly dismisses the case, stating that she sides with the record labels. Isgro doesn't have enough proof. For Isgro, it's a devastating blow. Winning this lawsuit might have swayed public opinion back in his favor, maybe even forced the feds to reevaluate their Payola case against him. At the very least, it would have given him enough money to comfortably retire from the music business. Now all he has left to look forward to is his inevitable Payola indictment. He knows it's coming. He just doesn't know when. Next on American Scandal, Joe Isgro's Payola trial begins as Morris Levy contemplates life behind bars, and prosecutor Marvin Rudnick takes his last stand against MCA Records, trying to stamp out Payola for good, but he's concerned it might just take a new form and return yet again. From Wondery, this is American Scandal. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Wondery.com, or wherever you're listening to this right now. If you're listening on a smartphone, tap or swipe over the cover art of this podcast. You'll find the episode notes, including some details you may have missed. You'll also find some offers from our sponsors. By supporting them, you help us offer this show to you for free. We'd also love to learn a little bit about you. Please complete a short survey at Wondery.com/survey. That's Wondery.com/survey. We'd love to learn what you're listening to, what you like, and what topics we might tackle next. You can also find us and me on Twitter. Search for #American Scandal or follow me at Lindsey A. Graham. We use many sources when researching our stories, but we highly recommend the book Stiffed, A True Story of MCA, the Music Business, and the Mafia by William Nodelsater. And just a quick note about our reenactments. We can't always know exactly what was said, but everything in our show is based on historical research. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsey Graham, for Airship. Sound design by Derek Behrens. This episode is written by Andy Herman. Editing by Casey Miner. Executive producers are Stephanie Jens, Jenny Lara Beckman, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.